Introduction. Majority of school children have various types of communication and language problems, which usually disturb the learning and adjustment in school if they are not checked. In this study session, therefore, you will be exposed to the concept of communication disorders and its properties. We shall present to you description of normal communication process as well as speech and language components of communication. We shall also discuss normal development of speech and language, the nature of communication disorders, characteristics, types, causes, identification, and instructional strategies involved in communication disorders. All this and more shall be our focus. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the functions of communication to man, 2. Contrast speech and language components of communication, 3. Point out communication disorders, and 4. Outline at least 2 treatment and instructional strategies for managing communication disorders in children. What is communication? Communication is the transmission of information between 2 people who usually act as a sender and a receiver. Communication is an interactive exchange of information, ideas, feelings, needs, and desires. Communication involves encoding, transmitting, and decoding messages. It enables us to relate with one another, understand the needs and feelings of one another. Elements of communication as a unit. For any communication to be meaningful, there must be a process which contains 3 structures. These 3 structures are 1. The message, 2. The sender who expresses or encodes the message, and 3. The receiver who responds or decodes the message. Communication can be between people or within a person, that is, self-talk. Functions of communication. It helps us to relate to one another and control our social environment. There are also other functions of communication. These are 1. Expressing ourselves, 2. Controlling our social environment, 3. Information, 4. Narrating, 5. Making explanations, and 6. Making requests. Speech and language. Human beings use speech and language system to communicate. Speech is vocal. It uses words. It can be spoken or written. Speech is the oral production of language. Speech differentiates human beings from other animals because only human beings make speech sounds. It is the fastest and the most efficient mode of communication. The processes of speech are respiration, that is breathing, phonation, that is production of speech, resonation, that is sounding out of the spoken word, and articulation, formulation of specific recognizable speech sounds. Language is an acceptable tool used by a group of people to communicate with one another. Language is made up of a set of abstract symbols made of sounds, letters, members, signs, and gestures. Their abstract symbols are governed rules. Research has discovered that there are more than 600 languages spoken in the world. 5 dimensions of language. Phonology, that is, rules governing the sound system of a language. Morphology, which is a combination of basic units to make meaning. Syntax, arrangements of words in a sentence. Semantics, meaning of words and combination of words. Pragmatics, how spoken language is used to communicate. Normal development of language. Every child learns to speak without any formal process of teaching. All human beings are equipped with the ability to acquire language. Even though the rate of language acquisition may differ from child to child, most children follow a relatively predictable sequence in their acquisition of speech and language. There are some children who do not follow the typical pattern due to developmental lag, ill health, or other factors. Hence, their speech and language use is disordered. Communication disorder. Some people, that is children, youth, and adults, however, have difficulties communicating with other people. They face a lot of frustrations and encounter a lot of problems as they try to relate to other people day by day. Such people are known to have communication disorders. Children with communication disorders may not be able to express their desires, thoughts, and feelings in spoken words, coupled with poor listening abilities, are likely to face difficult situations in schools. Communication disorders can be a limiting factor to total academic and social development of individuals. When a child's communication ability differs significantly from that of others, such a child is considered as being impaired in speech. The general indications of communication impairment include 1. Faulty transmission and/or perception of messages. 2. Possible economic disadvantage. 3. Learning disadvantage. 4. Social disadvantage. 5. Negative impact of a person's self-esteem or emotional growth. And 6. Physical damage or endangered health. Types of communication impairment. There are 2 major types of communication impairment. 1. Speech impairment, and 2. Language impairment. Speech is impaired when 1. It deviates so much from speech of others that it calls attention to itself. 2. It interferes with communication. 3. It provokes distress in the listener or speaker. 4. There are errors in the production of speech sound. For example, poor production of speech sound. This is known as articulation disorders. 4. Difficulties with the flow or rhythm of speech exist. For example, stuttering and cluttering. This is referred to as fluency disorders. There are voice disorders, that is, problems with the quality or use of one's voice. For example, husky, hoarse, breathy, or strained, or hyponasality. Basic speech sound errors include distortion. For example, S, that is sleep, for sleep, sleep or sleep. Substitutions. Substituting one sound for another. For example, pa, ba, ta, da. Omissions. Cool for school, air for hair, and so on. Additions. Adding extra sound. Causes of speech impairment. 1. Cleft palate. Paralysis of the speech muscles, absence of teeth, craniofacial abnormalities, enlarged adenoids, etc. 2. Dysphoria. Neuromuscular impairments in respiration, phonation, resonation, and articulation. For example, phonological disorder, multiple sound errors, final consonant deletion as omission, and language delays. Language impairment. These occurs when there are problems in any of the 5 dimensions of language. The problems could be either receptive or expressive. Receptive language impairment means inability to comprehend spoken sentences or follow a sequence of verbal directions, while expressive language impairment refers to a poor production of language due to limited vocabulary use of incorrect words and phrases or lack of speaking ability. Causes of language impairment. 1. Cognitive limitations, mental retardation, hearing impairment, behavior disorder, structural abnormalities of speech mechanism or environmental deprivation. 2. Injury to the brain. For example, aphasia, which is a loss of the ability to process and use language. The result often in adults due to A. Stroke, B. Head injury in children. 3. Hereditary, or you say genetic. 4. Environmental influences. Signs and characteristics of communication disorder. We have made you to understand in earlier discussion that communication involves 2 aspects, speech and language. The characteristics of these subcategories of communication disorder shall be highlighted. Speech errors. 1. Articulation errors like substitution errors, omissions, additions, omission errors. 2. Non-fluent speaking, difluencies, swallowing some words when speaking. 3. Stammering, that is stuttering or cluttering. 4. Poor voice quality, high or low pitch. 5. Unusual voice level or sound, loud or soft sound. Language errors. 1. Difficulty in expressing one's self. 2. Difficulty in following oral direction. 3. Difficulty in explaining oneself correctly. 4. Production of wrong sentences. 5. Inability to match letters with sounds. 6. Inability to break words into syllables. 7. Poor word knowledge, that is, vocabulary acquisition. And 8. Demonstrate poor concept formation, that is, does not understand how to connect ideas. Identification of communication disorders. We have so far discussed characteristics and types of communication disorders. It is therefore important to look at various identification processes that can be adopted in the classroom. The procedure for identification of communication disorders include teacher observation, screening, and diagnostic evaluation. Teacher observation. A child with communication disorders may experience difficulties in learning if the teacher is not aware of his or her problem. Teachers have the privilege to detect these difficulties among the children they are teaching. As the teacher engages the children in daily interactions during teaching, the nature of the verbal response they give will clearly display any communication difficulties. Upon such discovery, the teacher should pass such information to the parents and the speech and language pathologist attached to the school for further screening and diagnosis. Screening. Screening is the first stage of establishing the presence of communication disorder. Speech and language pathologists would conduct general screening. Educational challenges of communication disorder. Communication disorder occur at two levels, speech and language. You should note that children with speech and language problems face challenges that may hinder them from benefiting from school programs. Some of these challenges include 1. Social and emotional problems such as embarrassment, guilt, frustration, and anger created from them when they cannot communicate well, and also for those who could not understand them very well. 2. Confusion and self-pity and inferiority complex. 3. Poor self-concept. 4. Aggression. 5. Poor academic achievement. 6. School dropout. Implications for teachers. 1. It is important that teachers identify early children with communication disorders in the classroom. 2. Teachers should be skillful in arranging classroom activities in a way these children will interact freely with their peers and benefit maximally. 3. Teachers should be able to create language-sensitive classrooms. Bearing in mind the nature of characteristics of children with communication disorders and the educational challenges this pose, we shall next consider some instructional strategies that can be helpful in the classroom. Instructional strategies for children with communication disorder. Generally, it has been suggested that slight modification in teaching style and classroom management is the key to making the classroom comfortable for children with communication difficulties. Smith, 2007, Salender, 2005, and McCormick, 2005. Two key strategies here are general instructional accommodation and language-sensitive environment. General instructional accommodation includes the building of language-sensitive environment. Language-sensitive environment is a classroom environment where the teacher is aware of the existing communication difficulties of some children in the classroom, and he makes a deliberate effort to provide opportunities for such children to use speech and language to express themselves and receive messages from others. According to Smith 2007, language sensitive environments are classrooms that encourage, foster, and support language development. These children are assisted to mix freely with other children. The benefits of such an environment are: 1. It gives students reason to talk. 2. It encourages students to use new vocabulary words learned in class in other situations. 3. It provides a model for the correct speech or language when any student makes mistakes. Practical tips for creating language-sensitive classroom. Figure 5.1 highlighted some practical approaches for creating language-sensitive classroom. Receptive language. Replace directions and instructions when students appear confused. Repeat instructions always. Start with one-step instruction and gradually build up to multiple. Provide and use physical cues and prompt when given instructions. Pair them up with other children. Avoid yes and no questions. Rather, ask the children to repeat the instruction to you. Paraphrase contents in their own words. Tell you what they understand about the activity or topic of discussion. Figure 5.1b. Expressive language. Ask for clarifications when the child uses non-specific vocabulary. Point out to them that their verbalization was not clear. Create opportunity for students to use new vocabulary and talk about concepts. Figure 5.1c. Pragmatics. Teach and practice how to interpret facial expressions and body language. Treat scripted responses for certain social conventions. Teach the importance of different registers and when and how to use them. Figure 5.1d. Content enhancement. Teachers should be aware that such children have a special need. Teachers should be able to use simple methods of instruction that will enable those children benefit maximally. Use graphic organizers and charts to help children organize and remember important concepts. Study session summary. In this study session, we learned the function of communication to man. You were also exposed to components of speech and language of communication. Finally, we pointed out communication disorder and outlined at least 2 treatment and instructional strategies for managing communication disorders in children. That ends study session 5. Thanks for listening.